Hey guys, what are you at? Today is, I don't know what day it is, Tuesday, January 17th, I think. Last week, yeah, it is the 17th. Last week I had put a post up in a couple of the Facebook groups, Stitch Mania, Cross Stitch Canada, I think Cross Stitch Finish Line, about doing a video about how I organize and stitch my full coverage pieces. If anybody's been watching my videos for any amount of time, you know I love big charts, big pieces, go big or go home. I keep saying that all the time. Love HAEDs, love charts that I've created myself using Pick to Pet. So, I figured I'd put together that video this morning. Kids are off to school, hubby's gone to work, I'm fresh out of the shower. I managed to blow dry my hair, but that's it. So I'm having my coffee. It's my first coffee of the morning. And I said, right, it's quiet. I will do this video. So, there's so many things to cover and talk about in respect to full coverage designs, but I'm only speaking to my experience. This is personally how I organize my full coverage pieces and how I stitch my full coverage pieces. This does not mean to say that this is the way it should be done or the way everybody should do it or anything of that nature. This just happens to be how I personally manage to organize and stitch my pieces. I have 5 full coverage pieces on the go at the moment, with plans to start a 6th one in February at the HAED retreat in Crewe, which I'm so excited to be going to. I leave in like 15 days or something crazy like that. Yeah, so this is just how I do it, and this is what works best for me. Some of it may work for you, some of it may not work for you, but I also had some people ask me questions, so I'm going to try and cover those questions as I'm going through as well. If you have any other questions other than what I cover during the video, put them in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them for you. So, let's get started. Let's talk about how I organize my pieces, first of all. All of my full coverage designs, my HAEDs included, okay, usually end up like this. A baggie with the chart, okay, the chart is in here, and the piece. All right, the fabric. And then the floss, I was organizing in bobbin boxes. So I would take the floss list that came with my chart, and we all know what a bobbin box is. I would put them in one of these jobs, okay? And label the numbers on them. Away you go. I found that to be time consuming, because I was having to look at the I'm going to show you this chart. This pattern is going to be my demonstration pattern. This is one that I created myself from Pick to Pat, so I don't care if you see the symbols on it. I would have to look at the symbol on the chart, then reference the floss list to see what color that symbol was, and then go to the box and pull out the color that was organized, let's say, for example, in numeric order, okay? Too time consuming, especially when you have confetti and you're having to change colors fairly constantly. I found that was taking up too much time. So then I decided I would turn my bobbins around, organize them by color grouping, like oranges with oranges, reds with reds, that sort of thing, and put the symbols from the chart on the bobbins. So when I saw a symbol, I just had to look in the box and find it. And if I was stitching in an area that was mostly green, I knew which area of the box to go to. If I was stitching an area that was mostly reds, I knew which area to go to first to look for that symbol. I found this worked really, really well for me. So then when you're done with your piece, if you have floss left over, you still have your bobbin with the number on it. So that can just go back in your stash, right? And I just drew the symbol on the back side of the bobbin. So that's what I was doing. That worked really well. Eliminated me having, it eliminated that extra step of having to look at the floss list all the time. However, I've recently, I'm switching from using bobbins to using like a baggie system for my floss. I don't like how bobbins kink your floss. I've used bobbins for years. They work fine, but I've started putting my floss in bags. Okay. As you can see, this was one that was on a bobbin. That's why it's all kinked up. But I've been putting them in baggies with the name of the floss and the color number on them. And they're all in shoe boxes, like, you know, or plastic boxes downstairs by number. So what I did with my full coverage pieces is I just pulled the numbers. This is little boxes I had from when I was scrapbooking, and they have little zip around lids. They worked out perfect for this. Oh my gosh, are you going to be able to see this? Oh yeah, you will. Okay. So I pulled all the colors that I needed. This is for my Haid, which one is this one? This one is Christmas Carol. So what I did was I put all the baggies in numeric order with the DMC number still on it. I wrote in pencil that it was for a Christmas Carol. That way if I have to steal this baggie for another project, if I need to steal this color, I know where it originally came from. And then I put the symbols on little stickers on top of the baggies. Then when I'm done with this, if there's any floss left over, I can just peel the sticker off and put these bags back in my stash box with the rest of my stash, rest of my DMC. I found this has worked really well for me. It's really easy. The floss is not crinkled. And what I've been doing is I cut a length of, this is my floss in the front. I cut a length of floss to work with. Look, I still got the old bobbin in this one. I cut a length of floss to work with, and the piece that's cut, I put in the back. And if I got any other small pieces left over, it goes in the back as well. So there you go. So that's what my floss now looks like. These are not proper floss away bags. I didn't want to go through the expense of that because I was kitting up, you know, so many full coverage pieces. So these are just snack sized sandwich baggies, like just little snack size zip baggies. Okay, and these cards fit in them. I mean, they don't fit perfectly, but you know, I think the cards I got at the dollar store, so they're not expensive. So that is now how I'm currently organizing my floss. Okay, just in little boxes. You can put them in a shoe box. You can put them in anything, really. So my pieces that I'm stitching, where I'm parking and where I'm doing columns, or I'm switching colors a lot, this makes it really easy to find my colors. My pieces that I'm stitching color by color, because I recently changed how I'm stitching my pieces, and I'll explain a bit why, I'm doing this instead. So I pull a few colors that I need for that chart, because I'm going to stitch those colors all on that page, and I just put them on a ring. I punch a hole in the corner of the baggie and punch a ring. I still put the symbol on them if I need to, but I don't really need to, because if I'm only doing this color and I know what symbol this is on my chart, I don't need to put a symbol sticker on here. So when I'm done with that color, I can just put it back in my stash box. Okay. So that's how I'm organizing my floss. Floss gets organized into a box by chart, and I organize it by symbol. It's organized by color, so like, you know, number 156 or number 158 is after 150 is before 159, that sort of thing. But all of the symbols are there for me to see. I can just flick through very quickly and see the symbol. All right. So, stitching. How do you stitch a full coverage piece? With a lot of time and patience, that's how. All right, so Hades, for example. I tend to purchase the PDF copy or the PDF file of a Hade, a Heaven and Earth design. And then I print it off myself. This is the one that I have for A Christmas Carol that I purchased. I love this piece. This is probably one, well, I can't say it's one of my favorite Hades because they're all my favorites, but love this piece. However, and I'm going to show a little corner of the chart here. I purchased them in regular format, and can you see how tiny those symbols are? Really tiny, right? Drives me bonkers. I'm already looking at tiny fabric. I don't want it, because I'm stitching it on 25 count. I don't want to be looking at tiny chart. So what I do is I typically I take my chart and I photocopy it. I make a working copy. And again, I'm going to show a corner here. And I blow it up. So the symbols are larger. They're easier to color in and highlight as I'm going. I can see what I'm doing. And I print off a couple pages at a time. So as I get to the edge of one page, I'll hold this way back here. As I get to the edge of one page, I can then look at my other page to see where I need to feather into on this side, so that when that page is done, I can just get rid of it and pick up my next page. But I enlarge my charts. Again, because I'm staring at small fabric, I don't want to be staring at a small chart. I want to be able to see my symbols large enough that I can use them. If you're using a PDF reader on your iPad or your phone or your desktop, your PC, what am I, like from the 90s? You know, from your laptop or something. If you are using some sort of device to read your chart, you can blow those up. You can just enlarge them while you're working on them. It's so much easier. However, I don't like to use my tablet for my charts. I prefer the old-fashioned method of paper and pen. Mostly because sometimes I stitch upstairs, sometimes I stitch downstairs, sometimes I stitch in the car, at the university with my daughter while I'm waiting for her. You know, I stitch wherever. So I take my stuff with me, and I don't always lug my iPad with me. This way my paper copies are just right in my bag with my fabric and my floss, and away I go. Okay. So that's how I organize the floss. That's how I deal with my charts. My charts are paper copies that I print, that I enlarge and photocopy myself or print myself in an enlarged format. That's how I work with those. If you, like I say, if you're using a PDF reader, like Easy PDF, I think is one, Goodreader is another, you have the ability to blow up your chart and look at them that way. It makes it much easier. You can also mark off your charts as you go in those apps, the same as I do with my paper. I color in my paper as I'm going. Okay? So there you go. So that's how I organize or deal with my charts. stitching. Let's get right into the crux of the stitching of them. Now, you can stitch a full coverage design on any sort of fabric you choose. You can use tiny fabric like 25 count or 28 count. Okay, you can use larger fabric like Aida, 18 count, 14 count, doesn't matter. Use any size you want and don't let anybody tell you any different. If you want to stitch that sucker on 14 count, you go right ahead and stitch it. If you want to stitch it on like 40 count, go right ahead and stitch it. It doesn't matter. Do what's comfortable for you. Do what's going to make you enjoy your stitching. If you do not enjoy it, you are never going to finish it. Period. End of story. If you lose a smidge of detail along the way, here's a news flash for you. Full coverage designs are not meant to be scrutinized and looked at 10 centimeters from the chart or from the fabric. They're meant to be put up on your wall like a piece of artwork and enjoyed. And I don't know about you, but I'm never standing next to a painting in my house, 5 centimeters from it, okay? You're only that close to it when you're stitching it. Once the damn thing is framed and up on your wall, no one's going to notice if your design isn't quite as crisp as, it might be had you stitched it on a smaller count. Now, that's not to say that you're going to lose any of your definition of your design. Some of these charts, like Heaven and Earth designs, are so detailed that I really don't think it matters what color or what size, fabric you stitch it on. The chart is meant to be stitched. It is so detailed that you can stitch it on anything. So I'm going to show you some examples, okay, of different sizes of fabric that I'm using for my full coverages. So let's start with my Old World map. My Old World map by Heaven and Earth Designs, I'm stitching on 18 count Aida, okay? This thing is going to be huge, okay, because here's my border. I've left like almost 3 inches for a border, or just about, yeah, it's 3 inches. I don't think I'm losing any detail from this chart. It's stitching up lovely. I'm not losing any detail. It's 18 count. You can see my parked threads. I'll talk about those in a moment. Okay, but this is 18 count. Now I'm stitching this 2/1 on 18 count. 2/1 on 18 count will give you really good coverage. Like, you won't see fabric through your design, okay? The issue with 18 count, 2/1, the only issue I can see is that it does get a little thick, okay? Because there's so much confetti. But not so thick that you can't get a needle through it now. It's just, but it is thick, okay? It's thicker than, say, 25 count 1/1, all right? So that's an 18 count. My Record Girl piece is also on 18 count. I won't show that to you. This is Quiet Frost. I'm stitching this one on 16 count. Whoops, I got a needle minder on here. Bear with me. So this is 16 count. Again, a little larger than the 18. I'm not losing, from what I can see on my chart, I'm not losing any detail. Makes it a little easier to see the blocks, to see the squares to stitch. On a full coverage piece where you're not going to see any of the fabric, if you are comfortable stitching it on Aida, Aida makes a really nice fabric to stitch a full coverage piece on. For your neatness of your X's, if you're doing full crosses, okay? For the neatness of your X's, it makes a nice, because it keeps them very even. So that's 16 count. All right. Then I've got some I'm stitching on even weave. This is my Christmas Carol, which I'm stitching on 25 count. Now, I love this. I absolutely love stitching this on this fabric. It is probably my favorite, and it's partially because this is a really detailed chart, and there's a lot of little tiny things going on, little windows, little smokestacks, little banners that are hanging across the street that you can see. Horse, this is a horse in the background here. Partially because of that, but partially because I'm stitching at 25 count 1/1. Okay, I'm just using one strand of floss, and I'm doing full X's over one thread on my fabric. Okay, I love this piece. Love it. With the 25 count, I don't find it's very thick on the back. Some people are stitch 25 count 2/1. Way too bulky for me. Now, I'll get back to talking about this in a second, right after I show you my 28 count. This is my mini Bath Time by Hade, and I'm stitching this one on 28 count versus 25, but I'm doing this one in tent stitch. So you can see I'm doing half crosses there. Okay, I don't know if you can see that actually, but there you go. This is half stitches. Okay, so this is tent stitch, but I'm doing it 2/1 on 28, just so I can get a little bit of better coverage. Okay. So let's talk about the coverage of each of these. Like I was saying, you're putting this up on the wall. It's not meant to be scrutinized 5 centimeters from your face. 25 count. I'm going to see if I can hold this up close enough. I don't know if you'll see it or not. 25 count 1/1. Now you can't really see it too much here in the daylight, but if I'm downstairs and I have my light up against this, I can see, other than the bits of snow that are in here, I can see every once in a while I'll see fabric through my stitching. That doesn't matter. When it's held back and when you're looking at this on a wall, you can't see any fabric. This looks like solid stitches. There's no fabric showing. If there's a little bit of fabric showing, it is not going to matter. I know people get all up in arms, how much, not up in arms, I shouldn't say that. Some people get very concerned by how many threads should I use for what stitch fabric. My answer to that is everybody is different. Everybody's stitching is different. 1/1 full crosses on 25 count for me may be fine with coverage. 1/1 full crosses on 25 count for you may not be fine. Why? Because maybe your stitching tension is different than mine. Tension is a big thing when it comes to this stuff. The tighter your stitches are, or the more uneven your tension is as you're stitching, the more likely you are to see fabric through your stitches. And I don't have any here now that are really bad. Like even Bath Time Mermaid. When I take a photograph of this, I can see some of the fabric through, but when I'm just looking at it like this, I can't see the fabric through. You can a little bit, like right there I can see a speck of fabric, and there I can see some fabric, and in between the stitches there a little bit. And this is only half crosses. don't be concerned about, don't be so caught up in the coverage that you're not enjoying the piece, okay? So what I would suggest is, if you have a piece of fabric and you want to say use 25 count, and you're unsure whether you want to use 2/1 or 1/1, for example, you know your border that you've left? Stick a hoop on or something, or a smaller Q-snap, and stitch a 10 by 10 block 2/1 and stitch a 10 by 10 block 1/1. And see how you feel about the coverage. And the only way you're going to know is if you stitch a large enough block. So you haven't got to stitch like an actual block on the chart. Just take some dark colored thread and just stitch a 10 by 10 block, all in that one solid color if you want. And then do it again in, 1/1 and 2/1 and see what you like. Because if you're going to spend a couple of years stitching a large piece, you're going to want to be happy with it. You're not going to want to get halfway through and be like, oh, I really hate the coverage on that, or oh, I really don't like the way I'm stitching that. Take the time at the beginning to set it up properly. So, speaking of setting it up properly, some people have also asked me about gridding. You will notice every single piece I've just shown you, there are no grid lines. I do not pre-grid my fabric, nor do I stitch on fabric that's pre-gridded for me. There is nothing wrong with gridding. If you want to grid, go ahead and do it. I personally think it's a waste of time for me. I'm only doing a 10 by 10 block. I can manage to count 10 across and 10 down. I've always been, or I had always been, a cross-country stitcher until 2 years ago when I started parking and started doing full coverage pieces. I had always been a cross-country stitcher up to that point. So when I started parking and I started doing the columns or the rows, that sort of thing, that's when I thought about whether or not I should grid. And I just decided not to, because I'm so used to counting anyway, it didn't make any difference to me, and it does not slow me down. If you are new to this and you want to grid, absolutely, by all means, go ahead and do it. There's a couple of different ways to do gridding. And basically what gridding is, on your chart, all of your design is separated in 10 by 10 blocks by a grid line, and they're numbered usually. You can see these grid lines on my chart, these darker lines. Some people choose to draw those in or stitch them in on their fabric so that when they're stitching in a 10 by 10 block, they can easily see, oh, well, I'm on this side of the block, or this one stitch has to go 3 in from the grid line and 2 down from the grid line on this block, for example. There are a couple of different ways to grid, and you would just grid your fabric any way you want, but you can grid it in 10 by 10 blocks, or you can grid it in 20 by 20 blocks, or 10 by 20 blocks, however you choose. Some people sew in the grid lines, like they run thread through their fabric straight up and down and create the grid and straight across. And I think they use a thread that's called, I don't know if it's silken sliver or sulky sliver, but it's not like it's not a floss. It's like a metallic-y thread that your needle will not pierce, because heaven forbid you put grid lines in your large piece and you do your stitching and your needle pierces your thread and then it's sewn in. You can't pull it out afterwards. But with this sulky sliver, you can actually grab a hold of the grid line after the fact and pull it out of your stitching. Some people also use a very thin gauge of fishing line, colored fishing line. to do that with. So you can give that a try. The other option, oh shoot, and I didn't bring it up with me, is a fabric pen. You can get fabric pens that are, like you can get them in the sewing aisle of any craft store, that wash out or air disappear. If you're going to be doing a large piece that you're going to be working on for a long time, I would suggest you get the one that washes out. You dry your grid line with the fabric pen on your fabric and go from there. And when your piece is all done, you just wash your piece and the grid line disappears. I'm actually going to link a video for gridding down below. So there you go. All right, but I don't grid. I don't find it it's not, to me personally, it's not going to save me any time. So stitching the actual pieces, there are a couple of different ways to stitch. You can stitch column by column. You can stitch, so when I'm talking about column by column, I mean like you can come down a column, go up, next column, go up, next column, so on and so forth across your chart. So you can stitch column by column. You could stitch row by row going across your chart instead and working your way down. Or you can cross country stitch. You can diagonal stitch. You can also do, checkerboard, where you're staggering your blocks. However you want to stitch it. Whatever makes you comfortable. What's going to be fast for me may not be fast for you, but this is what I do. So for tent stitch, I find tent stitch a little bit confusing to my counting brain for counting. So for this piece, I'm stitching it row by row. I'm actually doing 10 across by 20 down and then park. So here I am with my parking. I'll do 10 across, 20 down, park. 10 across, 20 down, park. That's how I'm doing this piece. I'm doing this one rows across and parking down as I'm going. I also will feather into the column next to me so that I don't have a harsh break line where you will see when I change pages. I don't like leaving a harsh line because I am afraid you're going to see that page break. The same as when I do columns down, I also feather my columns. Like I'll go into the next column a little bit and come back out because of the same thing. I don't want to see grid lines or column lines in my stitching. That comes with a tension, with the tension changing from one column to the next. So when I'm doing tent stitch, this is tent, it's a modified continental stitch. Modified continental tent is what I'm doing. I'm stitching down and parking below myself. On my Christmas Carol, same sort of thing, only, well, I was working on a challenge here. I'm just trying to finish in this page, but as you can see, there's a page finish there. I stitched this one column by column. So I went column by column all the way across, right? Feathering into the next column as I'm going, right? No column lines, there's a couple right there, but nothing major. And same sort of thing down here. But this, I recently started changing how I'm stitching this. I've decided that it's actually faster for me to stitch color by color. And here's why. Confetti. Confetti, confetti. It slows me down having to change colors so many times in a 10 by 10 block. So, So I'm changing up how I'm doing it. But before I talk about that, just let me talk a little bit about, let me finish talking about doing it column by column. When I stitch 1 over 1, because somebody asked me this question, how do I start and end my threads? Maybe I should talk about that at the end, after. Okay, I'll talk about that after. So, yeah, so column by column or row by row. That's how I stitch most of my heids. However, cross country is my new, I guess, preferred method to stitch my full coverage pieces, because I don't have to change colors every 5 seconds. I don't have to change colors after every half dozen stitches. So what I've started doing is on my chart, I will pick a symbol, and the easiest way I've found to do this, okay, especially for me because I'm not using grid lines. If you have grid lines, you could start with your, you know, your symbol that shows up the least, that has the less amount of stitches, and go to your symbol that has the, all the way up to your symbol that has the most amount of stitches. But because I don't grid, I pick a symbol that has a moderate amount of stitches. So it's kind of peppered all in through. So that I can stitch those first. Those are the ones that are highlighted in yellow. I can stitch those first. And then I can use those as a base point or a reference point for my other colors when I'm filling it in. So what I do is I take my one color, let's say it's this one here. Let's say it's this color here. Okay. So I take out my color, I lay that down next to me on my stitching stand. I just pop it off the hoop or whatever. I don't even have to take it off the hoop if I don't want to, but there we go. So I got my one color. There's my threads. Okay. I pull out a strand, I thread my needle, and I start here. And I will stitch every instance of that color in that block, and in this block, and in this block. I will follow wherever this logically goes, stitching in every instance of where that color ends up. If it looks like I'm here, instead of working strictly down this column, if I'm here and it's closer to here than it is to there, I'll go here. I'll jump to the next column and stitch around. Stitch around so that I'm not trailing my threads too far. And I will fill in every instance of that color on the entire page. On the page. So I'm doing cross-country stitching per page, not this, you know, extreme cross-country where I'm stitching across my entire piece of fabric, just by page. Okay, so I'm cross-country stitching by page. So I pick up my chart, I highlight every instance of that symbol in yellow. If you're using an app, you can highlight it or select it in, again, a light color. And then as I stitch them, I color them in, color them over with another color, so I know they're stitched. But I'm not having to change my floss every 5 minutes. I run out of thread, I tie it off, pick out another piece of thread, go right back to stitching that color till it's done. Way faster for me. Way faster for me. So that is how I'm currently stitching a couple of my designs. So here's an example, and this is one of the reasons that I switched, because this chart here, all the colors kind of go horizontally, and as I was coming down through my columns, I was like changing colors, changing colors, changing colors, and I was parking all the way over here because as I was coming down through, like this color here, for example, comes through and it goes this way. It doesn't show up down here. So I finally said, frig that, enough of that. Let's do it color by color. So now I'm doing it color by color and just filling it in as I go. Does it make any difference to the back? How messy the back is? No. Back is just as messy. Or just as neat, whichever way you want to look at it. Right? So this is when I was doing column by column and changing colors. More blues here, less color changes here. And now I'm doing the cross country. No difference in the state of this versus the state of that. Same thing. Okay? It's not making any difference to the neatness of it. Because a full coverage piece, it's going to have a messy back no matter what you do. Okay? The 1/1, same sort of thing. I'm doing this one now. Cross country. That's what I'm finishing this page off here as cross country. And again, it's not making any difference to the neatness or unneatness of the back. Yes, you can see some trailed threads there, but that's for my waist knots. So as I'm stitching, these tails will all get covered over anyway. And I will end up with something that looks like this. Same as this. There's no difference. Okay? So there really is no difference. As long as you're not trailing your threads too far on the back of your fabric, it's not going to make a difference in the long run whether you're doing cross country or whether you're doing column by column. It's totally your own preference. Again, I started stitching thinking that, oh, well, I'll do it column by column because that's what everybody else does when they do full coverage designs. And at the end of the day, I just don't think it's, I have so many full coverage pieces that I need to work faster and smarter. Work smarter, not harder, right? So when I do the cross country, in order to alleviate some of the mess and the trailing threads, I do pick a moderately peppered symbol to start with. And then once that's in, I'll pick the color that kind of shows up the least and stitch that. Because if I had to trail my thread, where the thread is trailed, the next color that has more stitches, like the most stitches, would cover in those trailed threads as I'm stitching. And you won't see them as much. But in the end, who cares? Because nobody's going to see the back of your work anyway. It's going in a frame. No one's going to see it. It's going to be hidden. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. Okay? But if you are going to cross country, that's how I do it. I stitch from least number of symbols to, you know, how it shows up the most. Ta-da. Diagonal stitching. There are some people who diagonal stitch because they like to see the pattern emerge as they're going when they're doing columns. Brian, who is Blitstitch on Floss Tube, he stitches diagonally and it looks amazing. I still can't wrap my head around how he does it. He did do a tutorial video though on how he does his diagonal stitching, and I'll put a link to his video down below because it's fascinating. But you know, that might be the way for you to go. But I can't wrap my head around it. Okay. So I've talked about organizing the floss. I've talked about the different counts of fabric that I use. I've talked about 2/1 versus 1/1. All personal preference, of course. I've talked about coverage, how you just need to be happy with yourself. And don't let anybody tell you any different. Oh, too much fabric is showing? Piss off. Right? Tension. With a full coverage design, tension is something that you do need to be concerned about, because if you are stitching in columns, you will get grid lines showing up in your work if you're doing strict columns. You will get them showing up in your work if you're doing strict rows. You kind of need to feather a little bit. Because tension is a concern. If your tension is not directly evenly distributed across your piece. With cross country, you won't get grid lines. You won't get, not grid lines, yeah, you won't get chart lines in your piece because your tension is evenly distributed across your piece as you're stitching. If you're concerned about the look of your stitches and how neat they are in the fabric, 1/1, your stitches will always look neat pretty much because you don't have floss that's twisting up on itself with another strand. If you're stitching with any more than one strand of floss, You need to do whatever works best for you, but there's two things that I do. If I'm doing 2/1 stitching, I will stitch and I will either use, I will either railroad my stitches, and that's where you have your 2 strands of floss. When you go to put your needle down through your fabric, you actually put your needle through the middle of your floss. So as you pull it through, it flattens out your floss and it sits nice in your thing. Or I use a laying tool. So this is my laying tool. I have a video where I demonstrated how I use this. You can use anything for a laying tool that's a smooth tapered edge.